Hi everybody, my name is Cassie Gary and this is my ETAP 7500 Action Research Project. I am currently a graduate student at the University of Georgia pursuing a degree in elementary education. I am also a double dog student, which means I completed my undergraduate degree in May of elementary education, and I will then graduate this December with my graduate degree. I am super excited to share this research project with you, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Alrighty, here we go. So this is my research question. What is the benefit, if any, to creating a more academic setting in kindergarten classrooms as opposed to play-based? Why this topic? So I currently teach kindergarten, and I knew that because I taught kindergarten, this would be an easy place for me to collect data and conduct research. I also knew that play in kindergarten is a heavy discussion in graduate and undergraduate studies, but it's not a reality in the public school classroom. So all throughout my undergraduate studies, I took a play class probably each semester. And even so in my graduate studies, I've taken, I believe, 2 play classes, just solely focused on the importance of play in early elementary classrooms. So I'm really intrigued by this. Like, why are we taking these classes in college, but it's not a reality in the public school setting? So that was part of the reason that I chose this topic. These last 2 points are the actual questions that I use to guide my research. Is an academic-based kindergarten developmentally appropriate? And what are the benefits, if there are any, to this academic switch, right? So we know that when Froebel first introduced the idea of kindergarten, it was all play-based. And somewhere along the way, there was a switch to making it more academic-based. So I wanted to know, are there benefits to this? Are we servicing our students by making this switch, or are we disservicing them? So here's the layout of my project. First, we will talk about the literature review, which is just the process and methods that I've used to answer my questions. Then we'll talk about the study design, key findings, and where to now. Where am I going to go now that I know what I know? So first up, we have the literature review. So for this particular literature review, let me go back to this page so I can give a little spiel. For this particular part of the assignment, we were asked to find 8 to 10 sources to help guide our research, things that people had already published about our topic. So I wanted to know, I once again used these questions. Is it developmentally appropriate? What are the benefits to this, right? What did kindergarten used to look like? Truly, when kindergarten was first thought of, what did it look like versus what does it look like now? So for the purpose of this, I have pulled the 4 most compelling articles that I found to share with you guys. I would call this the meat of what I found. I felt like this would be more beneficial to you guys versus just a list of resources, right? So these are the 4 that I focused on most for my research, that I pulled a lot of from my research, that a lot of my questions and my findings are based around. Therefore, I'm sharing them with you. So this first one, Kindergarten Today, Less Play, More Academics. This website actually offers visual graphs that highlight the dramatic differences in what teachers now expect of students and how their classrooms are structured, as opposed to 20, 30 years ago. So nowadays, teachers are expecting students to come in knowing a lot more than they used to. So as a kindergarten teacher, it was not a foreign idea for me to expect students to know some of their alphabet, right? I knew some of my students should know, if not all the alphabet, close to all the alphabet. Same thing for numbers, colors, you know, how to hold a pencil, how to open a book. And so something that we're not considering is when this happens, when kindergarten teachers like myself assume these things, we're not considering the group of children who do not come to kindergarten this way, already knowing more. So does that make these students behind or delayed, or is it just the standard that we're setting? So, and we know there isn't a universal pre-K system. So what is it that's making kindergarten teachers do this? If there's no universal pre-K, if we know not all students are going to school prior to kindergarten, why are we setting the level, the bar so high of what students should already know prior to coming into my classroom? Interesting read. I encourage you to read it. Here we have Is Kindergarten the New First Grade? I also loved this one. I encourage you to check it out. So this study provides documentation of a comparison between changes in the public school kindergarten classroom between 1998 and 2020. Not 2020, 2010, my bad. So about a 12-year difference. So the findings suggest a shift towards more challenging literacy and math content and dropping the arts and the science and the child-selected activities, things that we already know. And a lot of it also is because of that switch to standardized testing, right? So this article also talks a lot about that. This study highlights that there's evidence that leads this to being both beneficial and harmful, depending on the lens you use to look at it. So the main discussion is really what is defined as kindergarten readiness. So these two articles really go hand in hand, but I thought it was very interesting that this article did not lend itself one way or the other. There were times that it would say, hey, this is awesome. This is beneficial for us to be doing this to kindergartners, pushing them to read, pushing them to know every single letter, pushing them to know numbers past 100. And then there were sides that said, hey, what are we doing, right? This is not good. The way we're doing this is not good. So I love that this article was truly unbiased. It pushed it, well, it was more of a study, not necessarily an article, it was a study. I love that this study highlighted both sides to that argument. These are the two other articles that I chose to include. It's how you teach, not just what you teach. And this is truly what a lot of this idea, not necessarily this article because it's more of a blog, if you will, but this is truly what a lot of my research came down to. So it's published by a lady named Katie Martin, and she offers explicit firsthand accounts of different classrooms she visits. She visited 3 different classrooms, one of them being the compliant classroom, one of them being the empowerment classroom, and one being in the middle, right? So in that compliant classroom, you see the typical teacher at the whiteboard. This is the one way to do multiplication. Everybody do it just like this. In the empowerment classroom, though, she saw students who were experimenting at science tables and they were up, moving around. They had easy access to a bunch of materials. And then there was the classroom in the middle. So students were being allowed to explore things, but in a teacher-directed way. It was more teacher-centered, right? And so basically she talks about how students that were allowed to take charge of their learning, just the difference in the settings of the students that were allowed to take charge of their learning and the students that were told, this is right, this is the way, this is the only way, I'm the teacher, this is what I say, this is how it goes, right? So she talks about the way those classrooms looked and how, as a teacher, we want our classroom to look like that empowerment classroom, but more often than not, if you were in a public school classroom, you're looking at that compliant class. Interesting read. You should definitely check it out. Last but not least, play is disappearing from kindergarten and it's hurting kids. I don't necessarily like the ending, the last part of this, it's hurting kids, because the article doesn't really talk about it hurting kids. I think it was just like a catch your eye kind of thing. But nonetheless, it highlights several of the benefits of play in the classroom. For more than just academic reasons, social and emotional reasons, right? We know that play does a lot for children. So this article highlights a lot of that. It also points out that teachers are pressured to pack every moment of the day with structured, academically rigorous tasks. And I cannot agree more with this. As a kindergarten teacher, when I walked into my classroom in August, I was handed a curriculum for every subject that I teach. I teach phonics, math, writing, and reading, and I have a curriculum for all of those. So while it's not necessarily true that students can't handle these academically rigorous tasks, in my professional opinion, I believe the issue is that we are trying to pack these rigorous tasks into the day all the wrong way. I have play as the developmentally appropriate way of introducing all of these tasks if we're choosing to push the curriculum even further down the chain. So a few things I want to talk about here. Play is the developmentally appropriate way of introducing these tasks. However, when you are handed a curriculum for every subject that you teach, a scripted curriculum that includes worksheets, books to read, etc., not only does that take the opportunity for play out, it takes the opportunity for the teacher to create an environment that endorses play, right? When you're handed a curriculum that says, this is how you're going to do it, that's how you're going to do it, right? And so we also have this, if we're pushing the curriculums even further down the chain, and by that I mean, just like this article talks about, is kindergarten the new first grade. If we're pushing these academic things further down the chain, what used to be taught in kindergarten being in first grade being taught in kindergarten, what used to be taught in kindergarten being taught in pre-K, if we're doing that, okay, fine, it's not necessarily harming these students, but we're coming about it in the wrong way, which ties right back into this. It's not how you teach. It's not what you teach. It's how you teach it, right? If you're going to push these things down the chain, there's a certain way you need to do that. And the developmentally appropriate way to do that is through play. So after looking at all of my articles and compiling them, not just these four, all of them in the grand scheme, I came up with some themes. I have developmentally appropriate, academic pressure, and approach versus content. And I feel like my developmentally appropriate and approach versus content kind of went hand in hand, so you'll see that I have them pointed towards the same way. Here I have questions I ask myself in relation to these themes. Is what I'm doing appropriate? Is it appropriate for me to do just direct instruction? Is it appropriate for me to allow my students to learn through play? And not necessarily appropriate for my students, but appropriate in the sense if an administrator walks into my classroom, are they going to be pleased with what they see? How do I know if what I'm teaching is appropriate, but the way I'm delivering it is not? So if I'm teaching things the right way, right, I'm teaching you how to do 2 + 2 in 4 different methods, but am I delivering that to you the right way? How do I know if that's appropriate or not for my 5- and 6-year-olds? What can I do to make learning more hands-on? And is it developmentally appropriate to not always use manipulatives? So for academic pressure, these are things I pondered. What if my principal doesn't like this? Ding, ding, ding. I think this is one of the major reasons that play has left the early elementary setting classrooms. We are fearful of what our administrators are going to say about it. What if my students play too much during this hands-on experience? So what if I can't trust my students to use their manipulatives appropriately? What if my students get nothing out of the direct instruction? Okay, so we take manipulatives out of the picture, or we do direct instruction and then let you play with manipulatives. What if nothing comes out of the direct instruction and therefore they have no idea what to do with the manipulatives? What about my students that learn better with one method over the other? What if my students learn best through a combination of both methods? How do I find that happy medium? And what if I don't have time for hands-on exploration? I think this is also another big factor with standardized tests being as looming as they are, right? I have to have this stuff taught by a certain period of time because my kids are going to be tested on it and they're going to be crying if they don't know the things on this test, and then I'm going to be crying because they're upset, right? So what if I run out of time for these explorations? Is it more beneficial for me to just feed this stuff at them through direct instruction to cover it? Or am I doing them a disservice by doing that? And should I just, okay, well, we just didn't cover 2 things because they were allowed to do more in-depth studies through one of those things. So just some things I pondered with in correspondence to academic pressure. So now we're going to talk about the study design. So these are just this is the process and the methods I use to answer my questions. So a little bit of context. First, I want to tell you what I did. And basically, I took 2 different math units, Unit 1 and Unit 2. Unit 1 was about numbers 0 to 10. Students needed to be able to recognize and count 0 to 10. Okay. Unit 2 was what we covered 2D and 3D shapes. Students needed to recognize and be able to name 2D and 3D shapes. Okay. So that's what we did for my study. So a little bit of context. I'm from Calhoun, Georgia. That's where I'm teaching, and I'm employed by the city's public school system. And I work specifically as a kindergarten teacher at Calhoun Primary. Most of the students in my class are 5, and the majority of my class also attended the school system's pre-K. But truly, they lost a little less than half of the school year due to coronavirus. There's also an instructional paraprofessional in my classroom who aids in everyday activities. So for the purpose of my study, my whole class participated, but I chose to pick 5 students completely at random to just narrow this down to, because I felt like this would be not only much more manageable for myself, but for you guys and anybody else that was going to read this, right? Because to read 20 different students' test scores and what it means and the interpretations is very overwhelming. So I chose to bring it down just a little bit to a little bit more of a manageable task. So of those 5 students, 3 were male, 2 were female. They are all middle-class students. They are white, and their cultures are all very similar. And this is very true for my class as well. I have more boys in my class than I do girls. The majority of my class is a middle-class socioeconomic, and their socioeconomic status is middle class. I have a majority white class with, I think I have 4 African-American students and 2 Hispanics. And they all share a very similar Southern culture. So here is my timeline of my study. So for the week of August 24th, I pre-tested students on their known knowledge of numbers 1 to 10. Really, it was 0 to 10. And then for the week of September 7th, academic setting lessons on numbers began. So this is the direct instruction. My school system uses Engage New York, which is Eureka Math, and that is what I used to deliver these lessons was Eureka. I used the lessons that Eureka provides, I used the worksheets Eureka provides, and in the end, I also use the assessment that it provides. So for the week of September 28th, students were post-tested on their known knowledge of numbers 0 to 10. It says 1 to 10, but it was 0 to 10. So then for the week of October 5th, students were pre-tested on their known knowledge of 2D shapes, and 2D shape exploration began. So for a whole week, we focused solely on 2D shapes. Then students were pre-tested on their known knowledge of 3D shapes, and the same thing. We explored 3D shapes with a little bit of review of the 2D, but mainly focusing on the 3D. And then here, the last week of October, students were post-tested on their known knowledge of 2D and 3D shapes. So for Unit 1, these lessons were delivered through, like I said, me standing at the front of the classroom, no manipulatives. I taught kids to the worksheet, right? And then they were tested on it at the end. In the same way, I gave them a verbal test that was generated by Eureka Math. But for Unit 2, it was much, much different. I did stand at the front of the classroom and deliver a small mini lesson, if you will, but it was a lot more exploration-based. Students were allowed to use manipulatives, and we had journals, and we explored shapes, and students got to feel and play with and build with different shapes. And their test was shapes were laid out in front of them, right? And then there were pictures of shapes on different papers. So if they had to take the actual triangle and put it on the picture of the triangle, the actual cylinder and put it on the picture of the cylinder. And then at the end, they had to point to each shape and tell me what it was, completely at random. So just like I said, collecting data for Unit 1, there was a Unit 1 verbal Engage New York pretest, and it was over numbers 0 to 10 in the academic setting. We used worksheets and direct instruction. Unit 2 was verbal generated pretest, exploration-based learning, use of manipulatives and journals, and then at the end of it, I analyzed the data. I basically explained this slide on the last one. So now we're going to talk about what I found. After I did all of that, what did I find? So this is the data from their pretest. This pretest was administered verbally. So Unit 1 pretest, Unit 2 pretest, both were administered verbally. The pretest for the first assessment came from the math curriculum Engage New York, and the second one was student made. So here we have what each student scored on each pretest and the average score of these 5 students. So it was a 30% score and a 40% score for Unit 2. So numbers 0 to 10, 2D and 3D shapes. This is before anything was taught. Here we have their scores post being taught. So same thing, Unit 1 assessment. The assessment was an Engage New York assessment. And here we have the teacher-generated assessment. So the average score for the Unit 1 assessment of direct instruction, students did the worksheet, 70%, average score of these 5 students. An 80% score for these 5 students. And this was, Unit 2 was where it was all teacher generated, and it was hands-on exploration. Unit 1 again was direct instruction. So Unit 1 post-test. The first post-test assessment was conducted at the end of Unit 1 on number recognition 0 to 10. This unit was taught daily through the use of Eureka lessons and worksheets. The assessment utilized was the Eureka-generated end-of-unit assessment. For this assessment, students were expected to identify numbers 0 to 10 at random, and it was read aloud to students individually. The Unit 2 post-test was conducted, of course, at the end of Unit 2, and this assessment covered 2D or flat shapes, the square, triangle, circle, rectangle, hexagon. Those were the 2D shapes students need to know. And 3D shapes, cone, sphere, cube, and cylinder. Those were the 3D shapes students needed to know. They were expected to identify 2D and 3D shapes at random. They were given familiar manipulatives from the lessons to complete this teacher-written assessment. So they had to short shapes to the corresponding pictures as well as name the shapes. This test was also given to them orally. So data analysis. When analyzing the data collected from both end-of-unit assessments, I wanted to specifically look at the scores from each assessment, as well as anecdotal notes that I took throughout teaching these lessons. I was intentional in paying close attention to which units students reacted the best to and showed the most growth within. And what I mean by reacted the most to, the best to, is how did they react to taking in that, right? So how did they react to the worksheet versus how did they react to getting to play with these things? Were they more engaged? Were they not engaged? Did they just play? Did they even complete the worksheets, right? So just which one did they react the best to? I also compared pre and post results to each unit to see if there was more growth from the beginning to the end of one of the units. So my findings, based on my pre and post test scores for both units, it could be easy to say that numbers 0 to 10 are not developmentally appropriate for kindergartners, however, shapes are. I want to dispel this by restating it is all in the delivery method. For the second unit on shapes, students were given more of a workshop model where they were given opportunities to explore shapes through journals, group work, and manipulatives. I believe the same results would have occurred if the same atmosphere would have been generated for numbers 0 to 10. So let me go back to this. So what did I find? Of course, as the graph shows, students did better on their Unit 2 assessment, right? But I think that a lot of that goes back to the article of it's not what you teach, it's how you teach. So it was very hands-on, and we know that students, there's something about that tactile learning, students being able to manipulate and touch and feel and do things with their learning. So I believe, and as you can see on this graph, there's not very much discrepancy within their test scores, truly. So I feel as if there would have been a more hands-on opportunity for students in the number 0 to 10, I think we would have seen a very similar outcome. So where to now? So these were some memos that I noted. Delivery, it is more of the way we as teachers choose to deliver our lessons as opposed to what we deliver. So just like I said, if we choose to offer the students the opportunity to play with what they're learning, it's going to be more beneficial in the end. Manipulatives, there's something to be said for the connection students make through the playing of manipulatives. We know this. This is something we are taught from the beginning of our teacher career, right? And finally, exposure. Students pick up on concepts quicker if they've been consistently exposed to it. So something that I want to point out here is every morning we do calendar, and in calendar time, we do the days of the week, the months of the year, colors, we count to however many days we've been in school, but we also do shapes every single day. We point to a shape. What shape is it? Triangle. What shape is it? Cylinder. What shape is it? Rectangular prism. Whatever it may be. So every single day, students are given that exact shape recognition. They're also given number recognition when we say today is November the 13th and we count to number 68 because today's the 68th day of school. But there's not necessarily explicit 0 to 10 number recognition or direction, right? But there is that explicit, this is a triangle, this is a cylinder. So I think there's something to be said for what students are exposed to, whether in the classroom or outside of the classroom, wherever that exposure comes from, there's something to be said for it. So this action research, how do I feel about it? Where am I going to go from here with it? This experience offered me the opportunity to do lots of reflecting of not only the public school system, but also myself. I plan to be more cognizant of the activities and assignments I present my class, as well as how I present them. And did I answer my research question? I don't really think so. I don't think I really found a true answer to, is there a benefit to making kindergarten more academic? But I do believe I have a more adapted lens to the approach towards content in the kindergarten setting. So do I necessarily think it's more beneficial to make kindergarten academic? I don't know. I don't feel like I truly answered that question, but I do feel like I answered it in the aspect of if you allow children the opportunity to play and manipulate whatever it is they're learning about, I think students make a deeper and an internal personal connection to it. So that is what I have for my action research. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you were able to take something from it. Of course, if you have any questions about it, please do not ever hesitate to reach out. I'm sure you can find my email through the UGA system. But yeah, that is all I have for you guys. So go Dogs.